My name is Emily Thomas. I'm 37 years old and I live in San Diego. I work as an accountant for a furniture manufacturing company. After taxes, I make about $70,000 a year. It's not glamorous. I don't drive a luxury car or live in a big house, but it's enough for me and my daughter to live steadily, quietly, safely. I'm a single mother. My daughter Harper is everything to me. She's 8 years old now and she loves to sing. Every afternoon, when I come home exhausted from staring at spreadsheets and numbers all day, she runs to me and starts telling me about school, sometimes in words, sometimes in song. When she sings, tilting her head slightly, concentrating on every note, I see my late husband in her, the same focus, the same gentle smile. My husband's name was Andrew Thomas. He died in 2020 in an electrical accident at his workplace. Harper was only 3 years old then, too young to understand why her father would never come home again. In those first months, there were nights she woke up crying, calling Daddy, in her small, trembling voice. I would hold her in the dark, rocking back and forth, crying silently with her because I didn't know how to explain death to a child who still believed monsters lived under the bed. I thought that was the worst thing life could ever do to us. I was wrong. The story I'm about to tell you happened on a weekend in June 2022, when Harper had just turned 5. That Saturday morning, I drove Harper to visit my in-laws in Los Angeles. Even after Andrew passed away, Roy and Julia remained close to us. Andrew was their only child, and when they lost him, they poured every ounce of love they had left into Harper. She was their last connection to their son. After lunch and hugs and a new teddy bear from Grandma Julia, we headed back to San Diego around 3 p.m. Harper sat in the back seat, hugging the teddy bear, humming softly to herself as she stared out the window. Then everything happened at once. A truck behind us lost its brakes. I heard the horn, the screech, the impact. Our car spun violently. Another truck loomed in front of us. I had less than a second to choose. I screamed, "Harper!" and turned the wheel. Then everything went black. When I woke up, it was around 7 p.m. I was in the hospital. My arm was in a cast. My face burned with scratches. Pain throbbed through my body. But none of that mattered when the nurse told me about Harper. Brain injury. Critical condition. No guarantees. I felt like my heart stopped beating. The nurse advised me to call family. I couldn't manage everything alone in my condition. My parents and my older sister Riley lived less than 10 minutes from the hospital. So I called. No answer. Again. Voicemail. Then I called my mother. She finally picked up, her voice irritated. "What is it? I'm busy." I forced myself to stay calm. "Mom, Harper and I were in an accident. I broke my arm. Harper's in the ER. The doctors say she might not make it. Can you and Dad come help me?" There was a pause, then a heavy sigh. "Oh, really? Your father and I will come later. We're swamped right now." And then she hung up. No questions, no concern, no goodbye. I stared at the phone, shaking, not from pain, but from something breaking inside me. I called back. Voicemail. Then I called Riley, hoping, just hoping, she would understand. She answered, annoyed. "Don't you know Mom and I are busy? Why are you calling so much?" "Riley," I said, my voice cracking, "Harper's fighting for her life. I'm hurt too. Can you come to the hospital?" Her reply was immediate. Cold. "Didn't you hear, Mom? We're swamped." She hung up. I sat alone in the hospital hallway, my daughter fighting death behind closed doors, and realized something I had never wanted to admit. I didn't have a family anymore. That was the moment everything changed. The hallway outside the emergency room smelled like antiseptic and old coffee. Sharp, bitter, and never-ending. After Riley hung up, my phone felt heavier than my broken arm. I stared at the dark screen like it might light up with a miracle, like my mother might suddenly call back, breathless and panicked, saying she hadn't understood, saying she was already on her way. But the screen stayed blank, and the silence around me wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating, filled with distant footsteps, murmured voices, and the occasional cry that made my stomach twist. I pressed my good hand against my chest and tried to breathe like the nurse had told me earlier. Slow, deep, control the panic. But how do you control panic when your child is behind a door marked emergency, and you've been told the words might not make it? I looked down at my cast. White, bulky, mocking. Harper needed me, and I couldn't even lift her properly right now. I forced myself to stand and walk toward the nurse's station. My legs were shaky, like they didn't trust the floor to hold me. "Excuse me," I said, my voice hoarse. Can I see my daughter yet?" The nurse looked up with tired eyes that softened when she saw my face. "Not yet, honey," she said gently. "They're still working on her, but you can sit. We'll update you. Sit. As if sitting could change anything. I went back to the chair, the cold plastic biting into my thighs. I looked at the clock on the wall. The second hand swept forward like it was rushing to something I wasn't ready for. I thought of Andrew. The night he died, I'd sat in a very similar chair at a very similar hospital, staring at a clock that did not care about my grief. Back then, I'd had my parents with me, or at least, they'd physically been there. Now my daughter was fighting for her life, and my own mother had sighed, like I'd interrupted her favorite TV show. My throat tightened. I pressed the heel of my hand into my eye, trying to stop the tears, because I didn't want to cry in front of strangers. But grief doesn't ask permission. And just as I was losing the battle with myself, my phone rang. I flinched so hard my shoulder jolted. The screen lit up with a name that made my heart twist in a completely different way. Roy, my father-in-law. For half a second, guilt rose up, sharp and unwanted, because I hadn't even thought to call them first. I had called the people who shared my blood, because somewhere inside me, I still believed blood meant something. I answered the call with shaking fingers. Emily! Roy's voice was warm, familiar, like a blanket you forgot you still had. Did you and Harper make it home safely? We haven't heard from you. How long have you been driving? For a moment, I couldn't speak, because his question, simple, caring, hit me like a punch. He expected to hear from us. He worried when we were quiet. My own parents had heard Harper might not make it and responded with, "We're swamped." My voice cracked. Roy, what's wrong? The warmth vanished instantly, replaced by alarm. Emily, what happened? The words came out in a rush, messy and breathless. We were in an accident. A truck hit us. I'm in the hospital. Harper's in the ER, and they said she has a brain injury. She's in critical condition. Roy didn't just react. He broke. Why didn't you call me right away? He shouted, not in anger. Panic. Raw panic. How's Harper? How are you? Oh my God, Julia! I heard muffled movement, a voice in the background, sharp and terrified. What is it, Roy? Roy spoke too fast, words tumbling over each other. Harper, Emily, accident, hospital. Then a gasp, a choked sob. And suddenly Julia was on the phone. Her voice was shaking so badly I could barely understand her. Emily, sweetheart, where are you? Which hospital? Tell me right now. I told her, and she didn't ask if they should come. She said, "We're coming. Right now. Do you hear me? We're coming." Julia, it's late, I started, because part of me still didn't know how to accept help without apologizing for it. She cut me off. I don't care if it's midnight. I don't care if it's raining fire. That's our granddaughter. Her voice snapped on the last word like a vow. We'll be there as fast as we can. Stay with her. Stay with Harper. She hung up. I stared at my phone again, but this time the tears didn't feel like betrayal. They felt like warmth, because I wasn't alone. Not completely. Still, the contrast was so sharp it made me nauseous. The people who shared my blood turned their backs. The people who shared my grief, who had no obligation to me except love, were already in their car. I slid down in the chair and covered my mouth with my good hand as a sob escaped anyway. Andrew, I thought, if you can see this, please don't let me lose her too. Time stretched. 7:30, 7:45, 8. And then, finally, the emergency room door opened. I shot up so fast pain ripped through my broken arm, but I didn't care. I didn't even feel it. A doctor stepped out, his face tired, eyes steady. For one horrible second, I thought I recognized that expression. The expression doctors wear when they're about to tell you your world has ended. My knees went weak. But then he spoke. "Mrs. Thomas?" he asked. I nodded, barely breathing. "She's past the critical stage," he said. "She's no longer in immediate life-threatening danger." The air rushed back into my lungs so violently it almost hurt. "Oh, thank God," I whispered, and my vision blurred instantly. But he lifted a hand gently, like he wasn't done. "However," he continued, "due to the concussion and trauma, your daughter is in a coma. It could last several days." Coma. The word hit like ice water. My hands started shaking again. A coma? Does that mean she might not wake up? The doctor's voice softened. "It's a mild brain concussion. Most patients wake within a few days to a week. In rare cases, it can last longer. But from what we're seeing, she has a very good chance of waking up." Good chance. Not a guarantee. But it was enough for me to cling to like a rope in deep water. I exhaled slowly, trying not to collapse. The doctor guided me toward a door. "You can see her now." I walked into the room like I was walking into a sacred place. Harper looked impossibly small in the hospital bed. Her face had scratches. Her arm was bandaged. Tubes and wires surrounded her like a terrible cage. But she was breathing. The heart monitor beeped steadily, and that sound, beep, beep, beep became the only thing keeping my heart from shattering. I sat down beside her and took her tiny hand in my good one. Baby, I whispered, pressing my lips to her knuckles. I'm here. I'm right here. You don't have to be scared. Her hand was warm. That warmth was the most precious thing I'd ever felt. I stayed like that, talking to her softly, even though she didn't respond. I told her about her teddy bear, about the silly song she'd been humming in the car, about how Grandma Julia would scold her gently for giving us a heart attack. And then, around 10 p.m., the door opened. Roy and Julia stepped in. They looked like they had run through a storm to get there, hair messy, eyes red, faces pale with fear. Julia saw Harper and made a broken sound, half sob, half gasp, like the sight physically hurt her. She rushed to the bedside and grabbed Harper's other hand. Oh, baby, oh, my sweet girl, she cried, bending down to kiss Harper's forehead again and again. Roy didn't cry loudly. He just stood behind Julia, staring at Harper like he couldn't believe the world would do this to her. Then he turned to me. His eyes found my cast, my scratches. And the anger that flickered across his face wasn't at me. It was at the world. He placed a heavy hand on my shoulder and squeezed, slow, steady, grounding. He didn't say much, but he didn't have to. His presence said everything my own father hadn't. Over the next 3 days, Roy and Julia took turns staying with us. They brought food I barely tasted. Julia brushed my hair back when she thought I wasn't looking, the way a mother does. Roy helped me adjust my sling, helped me sign paperwork when my hand wouldn't stop trembling. They did everything my parents should have done. And my parents? Not a call, not a text, not a single shadow in the doorway. On the second day, Roy asked quietly, trying to keep his voice calm but failing, Emily, where are your parents? They live close, don't they? My throat tightened. I didn't want to say it out loud, because saying it made it real. But it was already real. So I told him. I told him about my mother's sigh, about the words were swamped, about Riley's irritated voice, about the dial tone that followed. When I finished, the room went silent, except for Harper's monitor. Roy's face turned red so fast it startled me. He stood up, fist clenched, and for a moment I thought he was going to punch something. They don't deserve her, he said through his teeth. They don't deserve to be called grandparents. Julia wiped her cheeks, crying softly as she stared at Harper's still face. Poor baby, she whispered. She already lost her father, and they can't even show up now? How can they do that? I didn't answer, because the truth was I didn't know. Or maybe I did know, and I just didn't want to admit it yet. So instead, I leaned closer to Harper and whispered again. Wake up, sweetheart. Please, just wake up. That night, when Roy and Julia went to rest at the nearby hotel, I stayed alone with Harper. The hospital room was dim, the outside world reduced to distant footsteps and occasional coughs. I sat by her bed, scrolling on my phone to keep myself from falling apart. And then, a new post popped up on my screen. From Riley. I didn't know then that I was about to see the reason my family had been swamped. But the moment I saw the first glimpse of bright lights in her photo, my stomach dropped. Because some part of me, some instinct I couldn't explain, already knew. It was almost 10 p.m. The hospital room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of the monitor and the pale light from my phone screen. Harper's breathing was steady, shallow, but constant. Every rise and fall of her chest felt like a small miracle I didn't dare take for granted. I scrolled without thinking, just a way to keep my mind occupied, a way to keep fear from crawling up my throat. And then I saw it, a photo, bright, crisp, perfectly framed. For a second, my brain refused to process what my eyes were seeing. My parents stood in the center of the picture, smiling wide, too wide, the kind of smile people wear when they have nothing in the world to worry about. My mother wore a light-colored coat, her hair carefully styled. My father had his arm around her shoulder. Next to them stood Riley and her husband, both dressed in expensive-looking clothes, faces glowing with excitement. Behind them, the Eiffel Tower, blazing with golden lights against the night sky. My heart slammed so hard I thought I might pass out. I stared at the screen, unmoving, as if blinking would make the image disappear. It didn't. The caption beneath the photo read, "Celebrating the start of our 1-month Europe trip. Family time." 1 month. My fingers went numb. A strange ringing filled my ears, drowning out the hospital sounds. The steady beep of Harper's monitor felt distant now, like it was coming from another room or another life. They weren't busy. They weren't overwhelmed. They weren't stuck in traffic or held up by work. They were on vacation. While my daughter lay unconscious in a hospital bed, tubes in her arms, her life hanging in a fragile balance, They were standing under the Eiffel Tower, smiling like they had won something. I felt something inside my chest crack open, not loudly, not dramatically, but in a slow, horrifying way, like ice breaking underfoot. My hand tightened around the phone until my knuckles turned white. They had left one day after the accident. One day. That meant they had time. Time to come to the hospital. Time to sit by Harper's bed. Time to hold her hand. They chose not to. Instead, they chose Europe. I swallowed hard, forcing air into my lungs, but it felt like breathing through glass. Images flooded my mind without permission. My mother's tired sigh, Riley's irritated voice. We're swamped. Swamped with packing, swamped with planning, swamped with excitement. Not swamped with worry. Not swamped with fear for their granddaughter. A quiet, bitter laugh escaped my lips before I could stop it. It sounded wrong in the stillness of the room. I pressed my forehead against Harper's bed rail, my shoulders shaking, not with loud sobs, but with silent fury. What did you do wrong? I whispered, my voice trembling. What did my little girl do to deserve this? Harper had already lost her father, and now she was being abandoned again, because her mother wasn't rich enough to matter. Because I was just an accountant. Because Riley's husband owned a successful coffee chain, pulling in over $200,000 a year. Because they lived in a big house, drove luxury cars, and could afford month-long trips to Europe. And me? I made enough to survive. But not enough to be valuable. The realization settled into my bones like cold. They didn't choose the Eiffel Tower over Harper. They chose Riley. They always had. Growing up, Riley had been the golden child, the one whose achievements were celebrated, whose mistakes were excused. I had been the quiet one, the responsible one, the one who didn't ask for much and therefore didn't seem to need anything. I thought adulthood would change that. I thought becoming a mother would change that. I was wrong. My gaze drifted back to Harper's face, pale, still, so trusting, even in sleep. I brushed a strand of hair away from her forehead with my good hand. I won't let them hurt you again, I whispered, my voice steadier than I felt. I promise. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay on the narrow sofa beside Harper's bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying that photo over and over in my mind. Every smile in it felt like a knife. I wasn't just angry. I was clear. Clear about who they were. Clear about what they valued. And clear about what I needed to do. I didn't want revenge. I wanted truth. I wanted them to expose themselves, the way greed always does when given the chance. By morning, the anger had cooled into something sharper. A plan. When the first sunlight filtered through the blinds, painting soft stripes across Harper's bed, I sat up and took her hand. That was the last night I cried over them, I told her quietly. I won't waste another tear. Around 8 a.m., I saw her eyelids flutter. At first, I thought I imagined it. I leaned closer, heart racing. Then, slowly, Harper's eyes opened. Confused, dazed, but open. My breath hitched. Harper? I whispered. Her gaze wandered before finally settling on me. Mom? She murmured, her voice barely louder than a breath. I laughed and cried at the same time, grabbing the call button with trembling fingers. She's awake, I told the nurse when she rushed in. My daughter's awake. The room filled with movement. Doctors, nurses, voices overlapping. Roy and Julia arrived soon after, tears streaming down their faces as Julia hugged Harper gently, afraid she might break. In the middle of the joy and relief, something else stirred inside me. Resolve. Because while Harper was waking up, I was done waiting. That afternoon, once Harper was stable and resting again, with Roy and Julia staying by her side, I called a taxi. There was someone I needed to see, someone who would help me turn clarity into action. Uncle Robert, my father's older brother, the only person in my family who had ever looked at me like I mattered. As the taxi pulled away from the hospital, I looked back at the building where my daughter lay recovering. They made their choice, I said softly to myself. Now it's my turn. Uncle Robert lived in a quiet neighborhood just outside San Diego, the kind of place where people trimmed their hedges on Sundays and waved politely without asking questions. When the taxi stopped in front of his house, I hesitated for a moment before getting out. I wasn't nervous about telling him what happened. I was nervous about saying the words out loud, about turning pain into intention. Uncle Robert opened the door before I even had time to knock properly. His eyes widened when he saw me. "Emily," he said sharply, "what happened to you?" He took in the cast, the scratches on my face, the exhaustion written into every line of me. Before I could answer, he pulled me inside and guided me to the couch like I might collapse at any second. "Sit," he ordered, already moving toward the kitchen. "I'll get you water." I wrapped my fingers around the glass he handed me, steadying myself. Then I told him everything. The accident, Harper's coma, the phone calls, my mother's sigh, Riley's voice, the silence, and finally, the photo. I pulled my phone out and showed him the image of my parents and sister smiling under the Eiffel Tower while my daughter lay unconscious. Uncle Robert stared at the screen for a long time. His jaw tightened. His face darkened. When he finally looked up at me, his voice was low and shaking with anger. They did this while Harper was in the hospital? I nodded. They left the country the next day. He stood up abruptly and began pacing the room, running a hand through his graying hair. I can't believe it, he muttered. I raised my brother better than this. At least, I thought I did. I swallowed. I didn't come here just to tell you, I said carefully. I need your help. He stopped pacing and turned to me. With what? I met his eyes, my voice calm, too calm. I want to teach them a lesson, nothing illegal, nothing violent. I just want them to show me who they really are, without realizing they're doing it. For a moment, he studied my face, not judgmental, not doubtful, thoughtful. Then he sat down across from me and said, All right, tell me what you're thinking. So I laid it out. A lie, but a tempting one. A lottery win. A rumor, carefully placed. A story that would spread through the family like wildfire. Something irresistible to people who measured love in dollars. Uncle Robert listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back and laughed. Not a happy laugh. A sharp, bitter one. Oh, Emily, he said, shaking his head. That's cruel. Then he smiled. And brilliant. They'll come running, he continued. People like that always do. And they won't even ask how Harper is. I didn't smile back. That's the part I already know. We worked out the details carefully. What he would say, who he would tell, how long we would wait. No fake documents, no forgery, no fraud, just words, and their own greed doing the rest. Before I left, Uncle Robert placed a hand on my shoulder. You're doing the right thing, he said quietly, for yourself and for Harper. I nodded. On the way back to the hospital, I felt something I hadn't felt in days. Control. 3 days later, just as Uncle Robert predicted, they showed up. I was sitting by Harper's bed, reading her favorite fairy tale for the third time that morning, when the hospital room door burst open. My parents walked in first, then Riley and her husband. They carried flowers, gift bags, a giant teddy bear. My mother rushed to Harper's bedside, her voice syrupy and loud. Oh, my precious granddaughter, Grandma missed you so much. Are you feeling better? My father patted Harper's head awkwardly. So brave, he said, like he was congratulating a stranger. Riley plastered on a smile and handed Harper the teddy bear. I got this for you. Cute, right? Harper looked at me, confused. I smiled gently at my daughter. Say thank you if you want to, I said softly. She did. Then the performance ended. My mother turned to me and sat down beside the bed, her tone suddenly intimate. Emily, she said sweetly, family should stick together. I heard you came into a lot of money. I tilted my head. Did you? Dad stepped closer. Don't play dumb. Robert told us you won the lottery. I blinked. I don't know what you're talking about. Riley crossed her arms. Stop pretending. We're family. We deserve to know. I looked at their faces. Not one of them asked how Harper was doing. Not one. I took a breath and asked quietly, How much do you want? Riley didn't hesitate. $3 million for Mom, 3 for Dad, 3 for me. $9 million. I nodded slowly. All right. Their faces lit up instantly. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a lottery ticket. I don't need the money, I said calmly. I just want you to love Harper and be there for her. My mother grabbed my hand, eyes shining with fake tears. I knew you were a good daughter. They took the ticket and left in a hurry. No goodbye to Harper. No backward glance. I watched the door close behind them, and I waited. They were gone for less than an hour. I knew they wouldn't last longer than that. People like them never do. I was still sitting by Harper's bed when the hospital room door slammed open so hard it bounced off the wall. The sound made Harper flinch. Before I could even stand, my father charged in, his face red with fury, his finger pointed straight at me like a weapon. You think this is funny? He shouted. You think you can make fools out of us? My mother followed close behind, her face twisted with rage. Riley stormed in last, her eyes blazing, her jaw clenched so tightly I thought it might crack. You gave us a fake ticket, my father screamed. Do you have any idea who you're messing with? I stayed seated, calm. Because anger was exactly what they wanted, and exactly what I refused to give them. The ticket isn't fake, I said evenly. It just didn't win. My mother let out a sharp laugh that sounded almost hysterical. Stop playing games, Emily. Robert told us you won $50 million. Where is it? Hand it over now. Riley stepped closer, her voice dripping with entitlement. We canceled our Europe trip to come back here. You owe us. That's when I laughed. I couldn't stop it. It bubbled up from somewhere deep, uncontrollable. My father slammed his hand against the bed rail. "Shut up! What's so funny?" I stood up slowly and looked at them, really looked at them. "You didn't come back for Harper," I said quietly. "You came back for money." Their expressions froze. Riley scoffed. "Don't twist things." I nodded once. "There is no lottery prize. There never was. Uncle Robert and I planned it." The room went silent. My father's face went pale, then purple. "You tricked us?" "Yes," I replied, "because greed always tells the truth." My mother's voice shrieked, "How dare you? We're your family!" That's when Roy stepped forward. I hadn't heard him enter, but suddenly he was there, tall, solid, his presence filling the room like a wall. Before anyone could react, Roy swung. His fist connected with my father's jaw in a clean, powerful punch. My father stumbled backward and collapsed onto the floor, clutching his face. Julia moved just as fast. She stepped up to my mother and slapped her, once, twice, sharp, echoing strikes that silenced the room. "You abandoned her," Julia said through tears, pointing at Harper. "You abandoned a child." Security arrived quickly after that. My parents and Riley were escorted out, screaming accusations and threats that echoed down the hallway. I didn't respond. I didn't look back. In the days that followed, the truth spread through the family like wildfire. Uncle Robert told everyone about the calls, the vacation, the hospital, the money. My parents' reputation collapsed. As for me, I blocked their numbers, deleted them from social media. They no longer existed in Harper's life or mine. Weeks later, Harper left the hospital smiling. 3 years have passed since then. She's 8 now, healthy, singing again. Roy and Julia moved closer to us. They come every weekend. My parents still try to contact me. I never answer. They chose the Eiffel Tower over my daughter's hospital bed. That was the day they stopped being my family. After they were escorted out, the hospital room felt unnaturally quiet. Not peaceful, just hollow. Harper slept through most of it. She stirred once when voices rose, her brow furrowing, her fingers tightening around mine. I leaned closer and whispered softly until her breathing evened out again. Protecting her mattered more than any confrontation ever could. Roy stood near the window, jaw tight, breathing slowly like he was counting backward from something dangerous. Julia smoothed Harper's hair, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Neither of them asked if I was okay. They didn't need to. They stayed. That was the answer. Security came back briefly to apologize for the disturbance. I thanked them, signed a form with my shaky signature, and then, finally, sat down. Only then did the weight of it all land. I hadn't just confronted my parents. I had ended them in my life, and I didn't feel regret. I felt relief. The fallout came fast. Uncle Robert didn't whisper the truth. He told it plainly. To aunts, to uncles, to cousins who still believed my parents were decent people who'd simply been misunderstood. He told them about the unanswered calls, about the sigh, about the "we're swamped," about the Eiffel Tower photo, about the hospital room they never entered until money was mentioned. Phones rang. Voices rose. Accusations flew. My parents were confronted by relatives they'd spent years lecturing about family values. Riley's name followed close behind theirs, wrapped in the same disgust. Some relatives tried to call me. Not all of them were supportive. A few said, "They're still your parents." Others said, "You went too far." One aunt even told me they had the right to say no. I listened. Then I hung up. Because here's the truth no one wanted to say out loud. They didn't just say no to me. They said no to Harper. And that was unforgivable. Harper stayed in the hospital 2 more weeks for monitoring and therapy. Every day, she got a little stronger. Her smile came back first. Her laughter followed. And one afternoon, she started humming again. Softly at first, then louder, off-key, fearless. When she sang, the room filled with light. Roy and Julia took turns staying with us, cooking meals in the hospital kitchenette, bringing clean clothes, reading Harper bedtime stories when my voice gave out. They showed up in every way that mattered. When we were finally discharged, they came home with us. Not for a visit, for support. Julia packed lunches for Harper. Roy drove her to school when my arm still hadn't healed. They attended every doctor's appointment, every follow-up, every small victory. 2 months later, they made a decision that left me speechless. They sold their house in Los Angeles and moved closer to us. "We don't want to miss a thing," Julia said simply. "She's our family." 3 years have passed since that summer. Harper is 8 now. She's healthy, bright, confident. She still loves to sing. Sometimes, when she hits a high note just right, she tilts her head the way Andrew used to when he concentrated. In those moments, I see him so clearly it steals my breath. Roy and Julia live 10 minutes away now. Every weekend we cook together, laugh together, sit in the backyard while Harper puts on concerts for an audience that never misses a show. Those are the moments that healed me. As for my birth parents and Riley, they still try. New phone numbers, messages through relatives, unannounced visits to my door. I never answer. They died to me the day they chose a glowing monument in Paris over a 5-year-old girl fighting for her life. If there's anything I've learned, it's this. Family isn't blood. Family is presence. Family is who stays when it's inconvenient, uncomfortable, or painful. Protect your child, even if the threat comes from the people who raised you. And cherish the ones who show you, through action, not words, that love isn't conditional. That's the lesson Harper and I paid dearly to learn. But it's one we'll never forget.